Please start.
Hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure and honor to be presenting at the 8th National Interdisciplinary Congress on Early Childhood Intervention. I would like to thank Professor Ibrahim Dicken for his most generous invitation and looking forward to joining some of the conference sessions. I'm also hoping that in the near future, I will be able to visit your beautiful country and visit Anadolu University. Today, I will share some of my work and research that I have been conducting over the past 10 years and share some thoughts about inclusion that hopefully can create some conversation. I will start by reminding us that inclusion is currently a key international goal, one of the 12 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Now, Sustainable Development Goal 4 is to ensure inclusive and equitable education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now, while inclusion is an international goal, in early childhood education, we are still lacking a shared definition of inclusion. And as such, even though we may be using the same word, we often mean different things. So I thought of starting with some statements that describe 6 ideas that seem to have reached greater consensus and across the research, practice, and policy fields. And these 6 ideas reflect our growing understanding of what inclusion is not. So the first one is that inclusion is not just a mindset. Through decades of research and applied practice, we have arrived at a greater understanding that early childhood inclusion embodies the values, policies, and also the practices that support the right of every infant and young child and his or her family, regardless of ability, to participate in a broad range of activities and contexts. Now, the second idea follows the first one. Inclusion is not only about physical access to general education and care. Beyond an issue of physical placement, inclusion is reflected in the everyday practices children experience in their natural learning environments. On to the next one. Inclusion does not aim at helping children be like other children or to do exactly what other children do. Inclusive practices do not aim at ensuring that children fit a set of developmental or learning profile characteristics that most children typically would present with. Inclusive practices, grounded in the field of neuroscience, acknowledge the different ways by which children learn, perceive, and understand the world. The existence of different ways by which children develop and learn requires the provision of different means of supporting engagement. To this point, being included in everyday activities does not mean complying with activity demands. If active participation in everyday activities is a key goal of early childhood education and care, then active engagement is a shared goal for everyone. And this leads to the fifth idea, that equal opportunities to learn does not mean every child needs to learn the same way. Equal opportunities enable children to access equitable supports, that is, the type of tools and strategies and adaptations they need for their optimal development. And the final idea I would like to share is that inclusion and early childhood intervention are not separate fields. To quote Mary Beth Bruder, director of the International Society on Early Intervention, early childhood intervention is inclusion, and inclusion is early childhood intervention. Both, like parts of the same flower, form a system of services and supports that consider the natural environments in which children learn and develop, their family home, their early education and care environments, and their communities. Okay, so we have decades of policies with strong incentives to local authorities to increase numbers of young children being served in inclusive settings and support their development and learning in their natural environments. And decades of research demonstrating the positive impact of children with and without disabilities when they receive services in high-quality inclusive environments. And we have research demonstrating the specific practices that help children learn. In spite of this, we are stuck. We are still far from observing the practices that we want to see implemented. A recent report from UNESCO, the Global Education Monitoring Report on Inclusion, reported that 1 in 3 teachers in 42 countries reported not adjusting their teaching. It is a challenge. And a more recent report by OECD reports what might be a confusing picture. During the school year 2020-21, on average, across European countries with available data, 80% of children with special educational needs in pre-primary education attended mainstream settings alongside typically developing peers. Now, access to general education is important, but when we look beyond physical access, the picture changes. For example, data from the United States shows that in the school year 22-23, only 37% of 3 to 5-year-old children, so less than 50%, received the majority of support services in their preschool settings. That might include therapy they needed, inclusive support by a special education support teacher, or inclusive interventions. And this need for embedded inclusive supports has strong research support. Let's take a quick look together at some research synthesis points for inclusion in early childhood education and care. The first one is, we know that inclusion benefits children with and without disabilities. This is the most consistent research finding across the international literature, and benefits for all children extend beyond early academic benefits to outcomes related to their social, emotional, and personal development. Inclusive practices, interventions, and supports are key components of high-quality inclusion. Again, quality inclusion is reflected in the practices that children experience every day, not just the opportunity to physically be present in an early years setting. Now, when we look into research and what inclusive practices we want early childhood professionals to be implementing, we have identified practice areas with the strongest research evidence for supporting children's needs. I am pausing for you to take a look at these categories, hoping that these practice areas are relevant with your national curriculum and the recommended inclusive practices that you are valuing and practicing in your own professional contexts. An example of inclusive practices are what we often refer to as embedded interventions. Embedded interventions can occur naturally, anytime, and any place. They build on children's interests. They target children's individualized learning needs and they extend learning by offering multiple opportunities during the day for children to practice new skills that they learn. Adult support is the essential ingredient in the effective use of any embedded intervention. Another key finding is that effective professional development is essential for supporting quality inclusion. The early childhood workforce requires continuous quality support to be able to implement quality practices with each and every child. Likewise, teaming and collaboration among families, teachers, and specialists is a cornerstone of inclusion. Yet, we know from continuous research that early childhood professionals may not be adequately prepared to serve young children with disabilities. Okay, so if we have a better understanding of the practices that promote inclusive experiences for all children, how do we know how well we are practicing inclusion? This has been my research interest and work over the past 15 years. How do we know how well we are practicing inclusive practices? For the next bit of time that we have, I will share with you a tool that I have developed to support quality inclusion, and I have been working on in collaboration with colleagues around the world. It is called the Inclusive Classroom Profile, or the ICP. How many of you might have heard of the ICP, or perhaps have used it? So the ICP is a structured observation measure that includes a review of documentation and interview. It is designed to complement existing program quality measures and standards by measuring and focusing on inclusive practices at the classroom level that support the individualized needs of children with disabilities. And it uses a 1 to 7 point rating scale to assign scores for 12 items. Why was the ICP created? It was created out of limited research on the quality of inclusive practices used in early childhood and care programs. And existing program quality assessment tools capture important dimensions of quality early childhood practice. Yet, available tools are not necessarily designed to measure the quality of inclusive supports that are needed for supporting the diverse profiles of young children. And so the ICP was created to be used in several different ways. As a research tool, it can be used to measure and compare quality across various types of programs. Or it can be used to assess the effectiveness of professional development interventions, or to examine the relationship between classroom quality and children's developmental progress when linked to various children's outcomes. Now, as a program quality assessment tool, it can be used to assess inclusive practices in a program to meet standards and established best practices. But the ultimate purpose of quality assessment is really to inform professional development and support quality improvement. So the ICP was developed as a tool that can be used by consultants offering coaching to support practitioners in implementing inclusive practices, or by program administrators and a wide range of practitioners to support self-reflection and help guide their planning and decision-making around the practices they select and use. Okay, so there are 12 items or practice areas within the ICP. I am pausing so you can take a look at the tool's practice areas. These have been based on research based practices derived from international literature, such as, for example, the DEC recommended practices of the Division of Early Childhood of the Council for Exceptional Children that are a synthesis of research evidence in the inclusive areas that I shared earlier. Take a minute to look at those 12 practice areas and think to what extent these align with the practices that you value and use every day. Sorry, as you are taking a look, you'll see that the ICP items, they look at practices that relate to how the space, materials, and equipment within early childhood and care programs are adapted, and not how they are adapted a priori, but what adults who work in the classroom, what do we do with the space and materials and equipment in order to create inclusive opportunities for all children and support their individualized needs. It also looks at strategies for supporting children to engage in peer interactions and make meaningful connections and create friendships with other peers. It looks at guidance for children's free choice activities and plays and specific strategies for support children in their play and engagement in activities. And this item focuses on more free playtime and free choice activities, whereas a different item, item 8, will look at how do we support those more structured group activities where children participate in more planned everyday group activities. And there are items that look at the partnership between families and professionals and practices for monitoring children's learning towards their individualized goals. Okay, ratings on the ICP items indicate the extent to which classroom practices, on one hand, intentionally adapt the classroom's environment, activities, and instructional supports in ways that encourage access and active participation in the group, but through adjustments that might differ from child to child. Now, a unique element of the ICP is that it's not a checklist. Within each practice area, there are multiple indicators that consider various aspects of the practice that is being considered by the item. So with the ICP, you can look at but also how well the practices are being implemented. Now, what do we mean by how well? Some indicators look, for example, at how often a practice is implemented. For example, do children have many opportunities during the day to receive positive feedback about their efforts and the ways they engage in activities? Here, frequency matters because we want children to have many opportunities to get positive feedback, effort-based feedback about the way they engage and process information and they engage with activities. Many indicators look at consistency. Are we implementing some practices consistently during the day or consistently across all adults who interact with children? Consistency is an important dimension of quality in the ICP. And indicators also capture the contexts in which practices take place, like during indoor and outdoor time. So it will give us a picture of like, how does adult support look like during opportunities where children play indoors or when they play outside? And finally, we gather evidence on the procedures for individualizing practices for different children. Now, shall we take a quick look at the structure of the ICP? Each of the 12 items or best practices will have a series of indicators under columns 1, 3, 5, 7 that measure practices ranging from inadequate to the highest level of quality. The indicators describe specific strategies that are being assessed within the practice, and there are many different indicators for each item. Now, indicators also offer a number of examples of what these strategies might look like in the classroom. And many of the indicators will also have criteria for rating the indicators. A little bit on the research on the ICP. Over the last 10 years, the ICP research has assessed the psychometric properties of the tool across several studies. These studies have assessed both the validity and reliability of the ICP, along with other psychometric properties. These studies have been peer-reviewed and published, and information on these studies can be available through this presentation to you. Now, shall we take a look at an example of a practice measured in the ICP? We will watch a short video clip together, and in the video, you will see a pre-K classroom, a preschool classroom with 3- and 5-year-old children. The children are leaving circle time, a morning routine, and they're getting ready to line up to go outdoor to play. You will see a girl that has some difficulty following two-step directions, and a teacher embeds 2 strategies to support her engagement. Now, while we are watching the clip, think, what strategies does the teacher use, and why are these inclusive? Okay, here we go.
Outside time. All right, it's time to go outside to the playground. Everybody put your carpet squares in line up.
Oh, here comes Fiona. All right. Here comes Malcolm and my Daria. Here comes
Good job, Samantha. See, I'm here. Here comes everybody. And then what's next?
Nice. Line up.
Line up. You got it.
Nice.
I bet you have come up with some good observations. The girl here in the video uses a visual that shows what she needs to do first and what she needs to do right after through picture symbols. The teacher also prompts the girl verbally to use the visual. Now, why are these strategies inclusive? The strategy we observed was inclusive because, on one hand, it aimed at supporting her to engage meaningfully in the group and prepare for the next activity. At the same time, the strategy was intentionally embedded to meet her individualized needs through the use of a simple adaptation, the use of a visual. Thinking about the support we observed by this adult in this short clip, in the ICP, there are a few items where we could observe aspects of adult support that relates to the example we watched. For example, item 3, adult guidance on children's free choice activities and play, as well as item 9, that focuses on transitions between activities, includes several quality indicators that describe specific practices for supporting children to prepare and engage in activities with their peers. Okay, so the ICP, with being a synthesis of inclusive practices, as I mentioned earlier, is intended to be used as a tool by a range of professionals with an aim to really support the implementation of inclusive practices that professionals value and want to use in their everyday, in the professional contexts that they work with. Currently, local authorities across different countries are using the ICP in the following ways. Assessors and professional development providers like coaches use it to get a baseline for guiding professional development and coaching programs. It is also used by consultants or practitioners themselves to encourage self-reflection. And professional teams use it to encourage self-reflection and promote collaboration between early childhood and special education professionals through the use of a tool that can be used as a shared resource of practices, and encourage dialogue and communication across the practices that are used by different professionals. And it is also used to gather pre- and post-evaluation data to be able to measure the effectiveness of professional development and technical assistance programs used by technical assistance specialists and professional development providers. Yet, implementing inclusive practices in everyday programs is not a given. Let's take a look together at this photo. Two scientists are looking at a chalkboard full of equations. Let's imagine that research and policies are depicted in the left-hand set of equations, and the equations on the right represent successful implementation of evidence-based practices that support high-quality inclusion. Do you see there is a void in the middle that says, then a miracle occurs? The scientist points to that and says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. And that is what sometimes happens in developmental research. We have research and policy support for a set of practices that lead to desired outcomes, but we don't really do what it takes to reach step 3. That is the implementation of the practices that lead to the desired outcomes. Yet the field of implementation science that studies the conditions that influence the implementation of innovative interventions, practices, and programs in education have provided us with several useful models for understanding the factors that support successful implementation. I do not want to tire you, but I would like to share a simple formula proposed by the National Implementation Science Network in the United States. In this simple yet powerful formula depicts the conditions that might be necessary for successful implementation of inclusive practices. In this formula, we can first look at the last box. In the case of inclusion in early childhood education and care, this represents the desired goals for all children and their families. Okay? What are these? Those include participation, development, and learning for all children, and a sense of belonging for each and every child. Now, if we look at the first box of this multiplication equation, this box represents effective inclusive practices. And effective inclusive practices are practices with research support. This is a key component because how are we going to implement an inclusive framework? How are we going to implement inclusion effectively and successfully if we have not agreed what practices we want to implement, right? Now let's take a look at the next box, effective implementation. This refers to a set of implementation drivers that are needed for ensuring successful application, such as the procedures for building the capacity of professionals to implement inclusive practices. And the third box describes the factors that enable implementation, such as the legal structures and policies that need to be in place in order to plan the implementation of inclusion. The reason I wanted to share with you this formula is what is interesting is that these conditions are represented here in a multiplication formula. What happens if any one part is 0? The sum is 0, right? So this simple yet powerful formula shows us that to achieve the desired goals of inclusion, all parts need all parts are needed. Published research evidence on the ICP can be available to you. Okay, today we had a chance to focus on classroom level inclusive practices that we want to see in our early childhood programs. I would like to leave you with one last example and take you again mentally into a kindergarten inclusive classroom. We will see a greeting morning routine. Children say a morning hello to their peers by choosing from a list of pictures how they like to be greeted. Okay? So just give me just a second. Here we go.
Go ahead.
To be here.
Fist bump.
See? Yeah! It's not going to go Silence! Ashlyn took your guys' spot.
So what made these visual supports inclusive? What makes our practices inclusive? I hope you can discuss this question throughout your conference. And perhaps I can start the conversation by saying inclusive practices help children notice their differences positively. We start by noticing our differences. And inclusive practices create a sense of membership through supports that focus on children's unique needs and characteristics. Thank you very much. I wish you all a successful and productive conference.